2017 would mark a monumental leap forward for both iPhone and the smartphone industry at large, ushering in a new era that continues to this day. In 2017 was launched what might just end up being the last truly revolutionary iPhone, the last iPhone to so readily produce hype and excitement for so many. And that phone, as you probably already guessed, was of course the iPhone 8, or at least that's what you might assume should you go off Google's search trends for 2017, in which the iPhone 8 tops the consumer tech charts, followed by a certain iPhone 10. While I could use this as a measure of how underrated the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus were and how they hold a greater legacy than that of what's been so overshadowed by the iPhone 10, the truth here is most people would have been searching up iPhone 8 not because of the phone itself, but because the previous iPhone was the iPhone 7. Who would expect them to jump straight to 10? It caused an abundance of confusion and the absolute plague of calling the phones X, XR, XS, and so on. It's Roman numerals, people. The 10 is for the 10-year anniversary from the first iPhone. It makes total sense. Or does it? Does it really make sense Apple would launch both the iPhone 8, 8 Plus, and iPhone 10 all at the same time in 2017? Doesn't that seem like an odd choice? Especially with the iPhone 10 being delayed, not releasing in the typical September, but instead November. This gives the impression it may have been a bit rushed, but whichever way the cookie crumbles, the question still remains. What happened to the iPhone 9? Could this be an iPhone 9? Perhaps this is iPhone 9, or this. Perhaps this. Perhaps we have already seen the iPhone 9, also known as the Newton, released in 1993.
Take a memo on your Newton. Beat up Martin.
Could this be the iPhone 9? Perhaps the true iPhone 9 was inside of us all along. Apple's alibi of skipping to 10 for the sake of some anniversary is unconvincing at best, and perhaps is indicative of their original intentions having changed prior to 2017. Perhaps the iPhone 10 as we know it was never supposed to happen, at least not yet. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and for the longest time I've had this theory bouncing around in my head, the iPhone 9 theory, if you will, and today we're going to discuss what happened to the non-existent iPhone 9 and give some theories as to what Apple originally had planned. I think it's fair to say that most would agree, by all accounts and purposes, the iPhone XR basically is the iPhone 9. It was the perfect in-between device from the iPhone 8 and the iPhone 10, bringing the new design while holding back in the display quality. Leading up to the iPhone XR, people were even calling it the iPhone 9. This was, mind you, a year after the iPhone 10 came out, but that's what people thought the XR might be called. It would make sense. This, of course, didn't happen, and I believe it's because the iPhone 10 was rushed by a year. I think the 10 probably was supposed to originally come out in 2018. Whether or not it would actually be called the 10, who knows, but then the XR as the iPhone 9 would make a whole lot more sense. Perhaps we would have seen the iPhone 9 and 9 Pro come out in 2018, had it just been the 8 and 8 Plus in 2017, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, so let's take this a little bit slower and really discuss the theories behind the iPhone 9. First, let's rewind the clock a bit here. It's 2016. The iPhone 7 and 7 Plus are coming out. People are furious about the removal of the headphone jack and the lack of recent meaningful upgrades, but the 7 is still selling extremely well because of course it is, along with Apple's new product push for the wireless future in AirPods. But in the background, even amongst all the success, plans are naturally brewing for not only the next year's iPhone, but multiple phones down the line. And now Apple is discovering that they're in a conundrum. The Samsung Galaxy S8 would release early 2017, and did something Apple had yet to do, thin down the bezels significantly, even removing their physical home button and ultimately shipping one of the most beautiful displays in handheld form ever sold. This was no good for Apple. Samsung had already been ahead of them for years with their OLED panels, bringing more vibrant colors and true blacks. Even if the technology hadn't been perfect in earlier years, there was no question by this point how far ahead these phones were over the iPhone in terms of display quality. iPhones didn't have bad displays, but they were sort of boring and only good enough, rather than something vivid and eye-catching. At this point, I would suggest that Apple is forced to make a big decision: swallow another uneventful year with the iPhone 8 and the 8 Plus being the only phones to release in 2017, hoping the glass and wireless charging instead of aluminum would be enough of a change to quell consumer demand, but there was no chance this would go well, not with Samsung now not only having better screens on their phones anyways, but significantly thinner bezels for a much more modern experience overall. iPhone would be at risk of losing its already precarious title of industry leader for the first time in its history. At this point, I'd wager it was decided to rush 2018's iPhone plans for a 2017 release date. 8. This would be the first time since the iPhone 5C they'd launched two phones at the same time, well, aside for Plus models. So while these phones were actually announced at the same time, of course the iPhone 10 would end up delayed a good bit after the iPhone 8 launch, which lends to my theory of it being rushed. According to old articles, it seems there were issues in the manufacturing process, and I think it's fair to say the phone was more or less rushed out the door. Now, as it actually stands, the iPhone 10 is what I would say is pretty polished, but there was always some strange circumstances surrounding it, and trust me, this all leads into the theory of the missing iPhone 9. But think about it, the iPhone 10 was delayed. The iPhone 10 came at the same time as another iPhone that was already making a pretty significant design change with the glass, and I mean the iPhone 8 really wasn't that far off from a similar level of upgrade to the 2016 iPhone 7 from the 6S. Yeah, the 7 Plus's telephoto lens I do think makes the 7 a bigger upgrade than the iPhone 8 was, but not by a wide margin. Still, if only the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus had come out in 2017, it would have been disappointing, but also not necessarily unexpected. It would still feel like a pretty typical normal iPhone upgrade. So the iPhone 10 coming along with it, that's a whole lot of iPhone in only 1 year. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The iPhone 10 only came in two colors, a white and black, or specifically silver and space gray, marking the first time an iPhone was sold in only two colors since the 2012 iPhone 5, which came out 5 years beforehand. While some may have seen this as a sort of nostalgic choice given the 10-year mark of iPhone and everything, keep in mind the first iPhone didn't even have two colors. It just had plain aluminum with the black plastic piece for the antennas. So while sure, it was certainly a vintage iPhone thing to only have two colors, it was the second iPhone, the iPhone 3G, that brought it, so it's not something relatable to the 10-year anniversary. That said, we already know the answer here. The iPhone 10 was delayed and rushed as is, so they probably just didn't have any time to make more colors. I don't think it was an intentional decision just to call back to their older phones. No doubt they would have loved to sell you a gold iPhone. They likely just couldn't make it for the 2017 release window without delaying the phone even further. And while delays might not seem like any big deal in this day and age, iPhones at this point in time were absolutely never delayed. They had always come around September to October every single year since the iPhone 4S. Here's another odd decision. The iPhone 10 only had one size option at 5.8 inches. While this is technically larger diagonally than the iPhone 8 Plus, which is 5.5 inches, this is because of the bezel reduction on the top and bottom of the phone, whereas the 8 Plus remains wider and thus actually feels larger than the 10. Apple had been giving two size options with their flagships since 2014 with the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, then the 6S, 6S Plus, 7, 7 Plus, and even 8 and 8 Plus, but then just the iPhone 10, which was actually a relatively small feeling phone with about the same footprint as an iPhone 8. So only two colors and only one size option. And now I ask you, what were the biggest features of the 2018 iPhone XS? Why the new gold color along with the all-new max size? Alright, enough beating around the bush. Let me lay out my timeline and then we'll kind of break down the details. I believe originally Apple only planned to release the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus in 2017. These phones would bring glass, wireless charging, fast charging, and the typical yearly upgrade stuff. While this would be a boring upgrade, it'd be about par for the course for modern iPhones. It would also release with iOS 11, which would be a less dramatic change than it actually was from iOS 10. It's easy to forget, but in 2017 when iOS 11 launched, it was a buggy mess and is probably the most buggy iOS version that's ever actually shipped. Why was it so buggy? Because it comes back to everything being rushed. They needed to completely rework how you can navigate through iOS, and that's no easy task. So imagine having to speed this process up by a year when maybe you thought you had 2 years. So now iOS 11 is being rushed on all fronts because so many people have to work on the iPhone 10 stuff. So in maybe Apple's original timeline, iOS 11 is not a buggy upgrade, but maybe it even has a lot of the optimization improvements that iOS 12 did. That update was actually amazing. It even sped up older phones. It was great. So that's 2017, iPhone 8, 8 Plus, and a relatively bug-free iOS 11. Then comes the big year, 2018. This is when Apple now plans to really shift their business model and release two phones at the same time. In reality, 2018 would see the release of the iPhone XR and the XS and XS Max. The XR had the no home button redesign, but with a lower quality screen so it could be a cheaper option. The XS and XS Max had the full-blown OLED screens, which were nice, but not a feature everyone cares about, making the XR a solid choice. That's what actually happened. But what if in Apple's original plans, it wasn't the iPhone XR, XS, and XS Max coming out, it was the iPhone 9 coming out, alongside the iPhone 10 and the iPhone 10 Max, or perhaps the 10 Plus. Maybe they keep the old moniker, who knows? Now I know, but hear me out here. The iPhone XS was a pitifully pathetic upgrade over the iPhone 10. Perhaps the most lackluster of any Apple upgrade, except maybe the iPhone 14 from the 13. While there were minimal speed and camera improvements, the only notable changes were the added color and new size option. Even so, back in 2018, I think a lot of people gave it a pass because the iPhone X had been such a leap forward. Plus, the XR was coming out too. It was at least pretty interesting with all of its fun colors. But it's almost as if since Apple released the iPhone X a year early, they had to really stretch out some improvements prior to the iPhone 11 and 11 Pro coming out. And the iPhone XR really would have made so much sense if it had been called the iPhone 9. It was the perfect in-between device from the iPhone 8 to the iPhone X, keeping the LCD but upgrading the design. It would make almost too much sense. And let's talk about those titles. The iPhone XS was the final S titled iPhone, with each year bringing a new number ever since, 11, 11 Pro, 12, 12 Pro, etc. So would it be such a stretch to say that maybe that could have started a year earlier? 2018 sees the iPhone 9 and 10, and then 2019 sees the iPhone 11 and 11 Pro just like real life. This naming scheme would have been so much easier to understand from the consumer's perspective, as XR and XS always just stuck out as confusing people who would only refer to them as XR and XS, also known as the worst sort of people. Truthfully, I think the theory falls a bit flat here, as the naming scheme just doesn't make that much sense, even if it seems a tad more logical than what really ended up happening. So maybe the naming scheme would instead look like this: 2017 iPhone 8 and 8 Plus, 2018 iPhone 9, iPhone 9 Pro, and iPhone 9 Pro Max. Why not? Why not make this shift a little bit earlier? Why even go to the number 10? It sort of made sense in 2017 because of the 10-year anniversary, and Apple probably just had nothing else to call it. You already had the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus. Those phones were ready. They had to come out. They had already been planned for 2017. So then you've also got the iPhone 10. What do you call it? Well, you could have called it the iPhone 8 Pro, I suppose, but that would be really confusing for people. Although then again, I suppose the next year's 9 and then 9 Pro and 9 Pro Max would also be confusing. This is all just kind of spitballing. We have no idea what Apple would have named things had this happened. However, I don't think it's an unlikely scenario that this could be actually kind of similar to what Apple originally planned to do. We don't know, but there's no question the iPhone X was rushed, as was iOS 11. There's also no question the industry was moving really quickly, and Apple may not have realized at first how fast they needed to go to keep up. And then there's the AirPower debacle, which we haven't even touched on yet. This one, I don't really know how exactly this fits into the theory. It was rushed, so if maybe it was supposed to come out in 2018 alongside the iPhone X, maybe that makes more sense. They would have had another year in the oven. AirPower is the only product, by the way, that Apple has canceled after announcing it since like the 90s. They officially showed it off for minutes in the presentation where they showed off the iPhone X. To take screen time just for AirPower, clearly they thought it was a big deal. It was a wireless charger that could charge 3 things at once. I actually have a prototype of it, and it works, by the way. Yeah, no, it actually does charge devices, so that's kind of cool. But anyways, I do think it's fair to wager Apple at least originally never planned to skip over the iPhone 9. I can't see, Steve Jobs back when the iPhone 4 came out or whatever saying, make sure you guys skip the number 9. It's evil or something. It could just be Apple felt really inclined to copy Microsoft Windows, which of course went from Windows 8 to Windows 10. While I feel like this is unlikely, this kind of thing does happen. Just look at how Samsung after the S10 jumped straight to the S20. Why do you think they did that? Simple. They wanted to have a higher number than iPhone. It's a really simple, subtle marketing maneuver that might not seem intentional, but I can guarantee very much is, or at least the factor was absolutely taken into account for the decision. So where is the missing iPhone 9? Well, I think the iPhone XR is probably the iPhone 9. If anything could be the iPhone 9, it would be the XR. The XR had a weird name that was never brought back. We haven't seen any other R iPhone. It stands out in Apple's lineup for sure. But then that's just a theory, an iPhone theory. Thanks for watching, and make sure you comment down below your own thoughts and theories. I'm very curious to hear from you guys here because this is something I've thought about for a while, so I just wanted to make a video on it. But yeah, thank you for watching. If you found the video interesting, maybe hit that like button, consider subscribing for more content just like this. You can follow me on my socials if you'd like. We do have a Discord community, which is great. And of course, a huge shout out to the channel members. You guys are the best. All that being said, I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.